your Zoom is working. And the volume is okay. Whoever's translating, let's just say it is, unless you say something right now, we just assume that it's fine. It's fine. All right, that's Zoom. And here we are.
Your Facebook English isn't out yet.
It's not?
You're on your...
It must be.
Okay, it's live now. Yep, it's live. Let me check your Hindi.
It should be. No. Well, it depends if she has switched over to it.
Oh, okay.
Because she has to go from Zoom into Facebook.
Oh, thanks.
She may not be there yet. Or maybe she is, I don't know. But well, I can look and see actually. Well, she is in Zoom. She's in Zoom. Well, you can look on Hindi. I mean, I can look on Hindi. Let me just look. Yeah, it's not a problem. Is she there? I think so, yeah.
Okay.
All right. Okay. So, devotees, here we go. Hare Krishna devotees, welcome to our third evening program, our Sri Isopanisad for Bhakti Shastri. Yes, it's our 4-week program, 20 days of going through in detail the whole of Sri Isopanisad for Bhakti Shastri. Last night, that was our second night, of course, and we went deeper into the introduction. In fact, we're over halfway, we're about 2/3 or 60% of the way through the introduction. Tonight, we'll see if we can finish the introduction. If not, we'll get pretty close to the end of the introduction. And then tomorrow and Friday, we'll focus more on the invocation. So last night we spoke a little bit further about the defects of the conditioned souls, why the conditioned souls are not good sources of really foundational knowledge of who we are, what is life, and so on. Then, we went on from there. We talked about the Vedas, and we're going to talk more tonight. Varnashram as being the Vedic system, how seriously Vedic knowledge is taken, and then different types of evidence, mainly 3. We mentioned 10 from Srila Jiva Goswami, but mainly we spoke about 3 types of evidence, 3 ways of acquiring knowledge: pratyaksha, anuman, and Um, yes, amongst Shabda, we focused particularly on Aparushaya Shabda. Yeah, not just Purushaya. Purushaya means from human beings, but Aparushaya means not from human beings, means from people higher than humans, ultimately the Supreme Lord. And that's basically where we finished off. And we were just getting into the point, actually, of how the Vedas are coming from Krishna. So it's not just the Vedas, but the Vedas are coming from Krishna. So Krishna is very great authority, the greatest authority. And we had a little look at how, of course, the great Vaishnav authorities accept Krishna as an authority, or as great authority, or the great. And even how Mayavadis, particularly Shankaracharya, also accepts Krishna as great authority, or even the greatest, like that. So now we're going on. We're on page 6. We're on page 6. Oh, actually, no, sorry. We're on page 5. We're on page 5, paragraph 5, which is the last paragraph on the page, and it goes over to the top of page 6. So let us begin by reciting our prayers. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastya Chadesha Tarane Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vanchakaptarubhyas cha kripa sindhu vyevacha paditanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. And just keep an eye on that green square, every now and then. Yeah. All right, so we're on page 5, right at the bottom, and the discussion now about Krishna and the special or unique position of Krishna. That discussion is developing, evolving further, and it will as we go further through the rest of the introduction. All right, so at the bottom of page 5, Prabhupada makes the point Krishna is accepted as the Supreme Lord by all transcendentalists. He's including the Mayavadis, having referred to Shankaracharya just in the previous paragraph. And so Prabhupada refers to Bhagavad Gita. Our source of knowledge in Krishna consciousness is Bhagavad Gita, which comes from Krishna directly. Yes, so we accept that. That is Vedic knowledge, and that is really like highest level Vedic knowledge. And Prabhupada again, Prabhupada basically, he revisits, again, he discusses a bit about the method for acquiring knowledge called anuman, or deductive or inductive process. He discussed it already back before, but now he's revisiting it. So what Prabhupada says here, then, so Prabhupada says, since Vedic knowledge is pure, we accept it. Whatever Krishna says, we accept. And this is Krishna consciousness, and that saves much time. This is a point Prabhupada made yesterday or the day before we read. It saves time. You know, we mentioned last night how medical science has, over some hundreds of years, through experimentation, theorizing, testing, and trying things out, and many things failing, but then they find something which works. So step by step, like this, they have increased the body of medical knowledge, which humanity, at least Western humanity, has. But now as a student, you can go to the medical school and you've got access to all that knowledge, just like that. All that knowledge which it took thousands, maybe millions of people, but certainly many thousands, many hundreds of years to develop, you've got access to all of it, just like that. This is the advantage of accepting real authority. Of course, it has to be valid authority. You know, I could just make a little point about a Purusha Shabda. It's a good little point, that a Purusha, meaning not from humans, from people or living beings above humans, as opposed to Purusha Shabda, knowledge spoken by humans. So there was, going back some years now, not a very long time, but some years, I don't know, 20 or 30 years or something. There was a president of America called Ronald Reagan. He was previously an actor. He appeared in many movies. And maybe that's how he became president, because he was able to make a show. And the people, I tell you, just look what's still going on in America. The people are just it's so pathetic. It's beyond pathetic. So maybe because he was a good actor, they accepted him as president. But when he was an actor, his first job, we're told, as an actor, was to act in a cigarette advertisement for television or for movies, maybe, back in those days. And they dressed him up as a doctor. In those days, they didn't know that smoking causes cancer. So they dressed him up as a doctor. And he came on and he said, "Yes, I am Dr. Such and Such. And I want to tell you about these cigarettes. They're really good. They pick me up when I need being picked up, and you must smoke them. They're really good for you. Because I'm a doctor and I'm recommending." So in other words, he's taking the position apparently of an authority on health, but he's not. And the knowledge he's giving is it's terrible, actually. Yes. Whereas apaurushaya means knowledge coming at the least from people who are liberated, free from the defects, and ultimately from Krishna himself. Right, so here, then, the subject of inductive, deductive is revisited again. And Prabhupada gives, it's a famous example, actually, that someone says, man is mortal. Your father says man is mortal. Your sister says man is mortal. Everyone says man is mortal. So you don't need to experiment. You accept it as fact. If you want, you can go and study every human being to see if you find one man who is not mortal, who is immortal. But if you've got real authority that you can rely on, then you don't need to worry. You can just accept that. And among other things, it saves time. So Srila Prabhupada now, he really going over onto page 6 and what I call the second paragraph. It's the first paragraph which begins on page 6. I call it the second paragraph. So we want to acquire knowledge. This is important for spiritual advancement. In Sanskrit, the way of acquiring knowledge by just experimenting, trying out, researching, is called the ascending process, or aroha. But just accepting knowledge from real authorities, not just from anybody, someone who speaks cleverly or looks impressive, but someone who's really authoritative. It's called avaroha. So we want to accept knowledge from higher authorities who are actually real authorities, the great devotees, the Supreme Lord, and not waste our time and take the risk of just experimenting, trying to deduce, asking around like this. Just relying, in other words, just relying on our mental strength and the mental strength of other people, ordinary people. So in the next paragraph then, page 6, our paragraph 2, then Srila Prabhupada discusses this. There's a verse in Brahma Samhita, which, as Prabhupada puts it here, it says, just ride on the airplane which runs at the speed of the mind. Our material airplanes can run 2,000 miles per hour, but what is the speed of the mind? The speed of the mind means, Prabhupada explains here, that we're sitting here, we're all sitting wherever we're sitting. But now, just right now, for example, me, now I'm thinking of Mayapur. And in a sense, my mind is in Mayapur. Now I'm thinking of Radha Gokulananda in London. This is the speed of the mind. Very, very fast. Planes can go, I don't know, about 2,000 miles an hour. Maybe there's some. But the mind goes much faster. From here to Vrindavan to London, just like that, in two or 3 seconds. That's the speed of the mind. But the verse says that even if you travel at that speed for millions of years, you will get no closer to the Supreme Lord. So the verses, it's actually Brahma Samhita 5:34. Let me just read it. Pantastu koti shatavatsarama sampragamyo vayora tapi manaso muni pungavanam sobhyasti yat prapadasimnya vichintya tatve govindam adi purusham tamaham bhajami. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, only the tip of the toe of whose lotus feet is approached by the yogis who aspire after the transcendental and betake themselves to pranayam by drilling the respiration, or by the jnanis who try to find out the non-differentiated Brahman by the process of elimination of the mundane, extending over thousands of millions of years. So even you travel at the speed of the mind, thousands of millions of years, you will not actually get closer to the Lord. and the spiritual world. So that's discussed there at the top of page 6. So therefore, what to do? Well, of course, we can approach the literatures coming from Krishna, but even that is not really the ideal thing, just to read the Bhagavad Gita, for example. Actually, and this is the point Prabhupada makes at the end of this paragraph, we need to take shelter of a spiritual master, someone who really knows the subject matter. If we do that, then we can learn very nicely about the Lord, and we'll be able to approach the Lord on the basis of that knowledge. So Srila Prabhupada refers to, it's a Mundaka Upanishad verse actually, Tat Vijnanartam Sagurum Evabhigachet Samitpani Shrotriyam Brahmanishtam. To learn transcendental subject matter, one must approach the spiritual master. You'll see in the Isopanisad, in that paragraph, Prabhupada says the word compulsory is used. Must. You have to do it. So just to read the verse again, in doing so, one should carry fuel to burn and sacrifice, means you should be ready to surrender completely, surrender your life in sacrifice at the lotus feet of the spiritual master. And then the symptom of such a spiritual master is that he is expert in understanding the Vedic conclusion, and therefore he constantly engages in the service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So Srila Prabhupada, as Prabhupada describes in the purport, in the introduction, Prabhupada emphasizes 2 qualifications of the bona fide guru. Prabhupada says, he is one who has rightly heard the Vedic message from the right source. So that's good. In other words, he has, as the verse itself says, he is expert in understanding the Vedic conclusion. And secondly, he must practically be firmly fixed in Brahman. Yes. And in the actual direct translation, constantly engages in the service of the Supreme Lord. Yes. So yes, that's the process. Not by the ascending process by our mental power, trying to travel at the speed of the mind, which will not help us at all. But we have to take shelter of the Lord, of the Vedic literatures which are coming from the Lord, and we have to learn how to understand them by being directed, instructed by the spiritual master. So the next paragraph 3 on this page 6. So now in this paragraph, Srila Prabhupada focuses on Krishna. In Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, the actual aim of Vedic research is to find out Krishna. Well, that's 15:15, isn't it? Those of you can remember from when we were studying Bhagavad Gita, Vedaischa sarver aham eva vedyo. By all the Vedas, I am to be known. It may seem that there are other things to be known. I mean, there are many things in one sense, but the real essence, the message, what we need to get, that is, that from the Vedic literatures, we understand Krishna. So then in this paragraph 3, on page 6, Prabhupada goes into a description of Krishna. And again, he just refers to Brahma Samhita says Krishna Govinda has innumerable forms, but they're all one. Prabhupada's referring to Brahma Samhita 5:39, chapter 39. Ramadi Murtishu Kala Niyamena Tishtan, Nanavataram Akarod Bhuvaneshu Kintu, Krishna Swayam Samabhavat Parama Pumanyo, Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, who manifested himself personally as Krishna and the different avatars in the world in the forms of Rama, Nrsimha, Vamana, etc., as his subjective portions. So as Prabhupada is saying here, that Krishna has innumerable forms, but they're all one. So he manifested himself personally as Krishna, and then the different avatars, as the verse says. So then, Srila Prabhupada, basically what he does, he explores how the forms of the Lord are different from our forms. Yeah. So Krishna Govinda has innumerable forms, but they're all one. And Prabhupada says they're not like our forms, which are fallible. So it looks like there's mainly 5 differences. It might be a good idea to note this for your Bhakti Shastri. 5 main differences that Prabhupada notes here between our forms and Krishna's. So that was the first one. Our forms are fallible. Krishna's forms are infallible. Then next, our forms are beginningless. And his form, so our forms have beginnings, his forms are beginningless, as Prabhupada says. His form has no beginning, it's ananta. My form is sitting here and not in my apartment. My form is limited. So yeah, fallible, infallible. Our forms have beginnings, his forms are beginningless. He is, okay. He is everywhere. His form is ananta, and ours means no end. Yeah. It's a little different from our forms have beginnings, his don't. Now our forms have ends, but his forms have no ends. He is everywhere. He's here, he's in Goloka, he's in our hearts. We're in one place only. And then finally, he is the original, the oldest. Yes. But even though he's the oldest, Prabhupada makes the point. Yeah, you've seen pictures of Krishna as charioteer from Bhagavad Gita. At that time, he was not less than 100 years old. He had grandchildren, but he looked just like a boy. Here we are. I am 69. I do not look like a boy. I think I look like I'm 69.
Yes, and your young photo.
Huh?
Yes, in your photo at the youth.
Okay. Yes, okay. So then again, at the end of this 3rd paragraph on page 6, Prabhupada refers to Brahma Samhita. He doesn't even mention it, but he refers to Brahma Samhita, verse 33. Advaita Machutam Anadim Anantarupam Adyam Purana Purusham Navayovanam Cha Vedeshu Dolabam Adolabam Atma Bhakto Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, who is inaccessible to the Vedas. Vedeshu durlabham, very hard to achieve through the Vedas, but adurlabham atma bhakto, but obtainable by pure unalloyed devotion of the soul. Yes. So we go on to the last paragraph on page 6. And here, well, okay. Srila Prabhupada begins discussing, he gets into a discussion. Let's have a look here. Well, he gets into a discussion about not exactly the origin of, not the origin of the Vedas, but how the Vedas have come to us. There's a particular way in which the Vedas have come to us. Yes, so, oops, what am I doing? So yes, he tells the story of, mentions the story of Srila Vyasadeva from chapter 4 of the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, that Vyasadeva saw Kali Yuga starting, so we must make things simpler for the people. So he divided up the Vedas and put them into writing. Previously, they were not available in written form. People would simply hear and remember. But he had them written down by Ganesh. And he divided them into different sections. Therefore, he's called Veda Vyas. Vyas means divider. Veda Vyas means he who divided the Veda. So there was originally just one Veda, which in fact was called the Yajur Veda, actually. But he divided it, as Prabhupada explains, into Rig, Sama, Atharva, Yajur. Then he gave the responsibility for different of these Vedas to different disciples. Payala Rishi he got the Rig Veda. Jaimini got the Sama Veda. Vaishampayana got the Yajur Veda. Sumantu Muni, Angira, he got the Atharva Veda. And Romaharshana Sutta, the father of Sutta Goswami, Romaharshana Sutta, he got the Puranas and Itihasas. Puranas means, like Srimad Bhagavatam is one of the Puranas, and Itihasas means the histories, particularly Mahabharata and Ramayana. So like this, he compiled them all, divided them all, and I won't go, we could go into a whole thing, the structure of the Vedas. It is interesting. If we get time, I'll go a bit more into the structure of the Vedas. In your study guide on page, I think it's 9, or anyway, if you just have a look, you'll see someone has drawn a diagram which it shows the Vedas. Honestly, it's more good than bad, put it that way, but it's somewhat confusing, actually. So all this happened, dividing the Vedas, handing them over to different of his students, and and like that. So, well, let me explain. We've got a little time, so I'll explain a bit. That first of all, the four Vedas that were, he divided the one Veda, Yajur Veda, into four, and divided the four into each into four sections. Samhita, Brahmana, a Aranyaka, and an Upanishad, like Rig Veda, Samaveda, Yajur Veda, Atharva Veda. If you go through, I mean, there are remnants of them left. You'll find, for example, Rig Veda is divided into Samhitas. Each Samhita has a verse or verses connected with it called Brahmanas. And those Brahmanas, so the Samhitas glorify the heavenly planets, and they tell us we should go to them. The Brahmanas describe the sacrifice for going to the particular heavenly planet described in that particular Samhita. The Aranyakas describe in more detail the sacrifice and other sort of related processes to help one to approach that heavenly planet. And then the Upanishad gives like a philosophical purport to the ideas. So the Upanishads are more philosophical. So that's the structure of the four Vedas, devotees. There are Samhitas describing heavenly planets, you should go there. Then each Samhita has an Aranyaka, which describes the sacrifice for going there. I mean, a Brahmana, a type of written, like a small book, called a Brahmana, the sacrifice for going there. Then third, there's the Aranyaka with more details about the process for going there. And then Upanishad, the philosophical purport of the whole thing. And not just the philosophical purport, but the philosophical purport in the sense of how it's all related to Brahman realization. How it's all related to Brahman realization, actually. Yeah, so therefore, so many of the Upanishads have impersonal descriptions of Brahman. Yes, that's a fact. So then the fifth Veda is the Puranas. The Puranas. And the Puranas are divided into six, or rather into three groups of six. Just listen to this. This is Lord Shiva speaking in the Padma Purana. And he says, speaking to Durga, "O beautiful lady, know that the Vishnu, Narada, Bhagavat, Garuda, Padma, and Varaha Puranas are in the mode of goodness. The Brahmanda, Brahmavaivarta, Markandeya, Bhavishya, Vamana, and Brahma Puranas are in the mode of passion. And the Matsya, Kurama, Linga, Shiva, Skanda, and Agni Puranas are in the mode of ignorance." So the history is, and it's there in the first canto of the Bhagavatam, chapter 4, chapter 5, is that Vyasadeva finished the compilation, and including the 18 Puranas, 3 groups of 6 in each of the modes. And then he wrote personally Vedanta Sutra, which was his sort of final analysis. What does it all mean? What's the ultimate message that you should get from it? But when he finished Vedanta Sutra, he found he was not feeling satisfied. And he couldn't understand. I have come to the end of all knowledge. Vedanta. Veda anta. Veda means knowledge. Anta means the end. Sutra, in the form of brief statements. I've come to the end. I understand it all, but I don't feel satisfied. And Narada Muni came and told him that you don't feel satisfied because you have not sufficiently glorified Krishna. So you need to, in fact, effectively what he said is, you need to redo the Bhagavad Purana. And Narada taught him a process of meditation, which he went into, Vyasadeva went into, and he realized the Srimad Bhagavatam. So he replaced the existing Bhagavad Purana with the Srimad Bhagavatam. After the Puranas the 18, including Bhagavad Purana, had been compiled, then after Vedanta Sutra had been written, which was after the Puranas had been written, then after everything he compiled Srimad Bhagavatam. Yes. So, right. And then after he compiled Srimad Bhagavatam, he felt satisfied. Very satisfied, because it was so extensively and beautifully and in so much detail describing Krishna. You know, it's a fact that other of the Puranas particularly definitely talk about Krishna, but not like the Bhagavatam talks about Krishna. Yes. So, right. So, we're on, what are we on now? We're on page, let me just check. We're on page 7. We have basically, yeah. Well, let's just see if we've finished really the last paragraph on page 6. Yeah, I would say we have. So, well, just one other point we could make. That, first of all, Vyasadeva, this is in that last paragraph on page 6. First of all, Vyasadeva divided up the Yajurveda into Rig, Sama, Yajur, and Atharva. Then he was thinking about, as Prabhupada explains, the less intelligent class of people, Stri, Sudra, Dvija Bandhu, women, laborers, and the fallen descendants of the higher classes. Yeah, like that. So he thought of them, and he thought they won't understand these 4 Vedas and with their Samhitas and Brahmanas and all that. I have to compile simpler literatures. I mean, what appear on the surface in a technical sense simpler, although the knowledge is no less deep. In fact, the knowledge is even deeper. but in a very sort of colorful and attractive way with stories and so on, so that these less intelligent people, and that includes everyone in Kali Yuga, basically, they'll have access to this knowledge. So therefore he compiled the Puranas, therefore he compiled the Itihasas, the histories, Mahabharata, Ramayana, and then finally Srimad Bhagavatam, as we just said. Now, then Prabhupada, in the second paragraph on page 7, Srila Prabhupada starts talking about, he gives some explanation of Vedanta Sutra. After Vyasadeva had done the initial compilation of the 18 Puranas, then he personally wrote, it was like his realizations, Vedanta Sutra, but still felt dissatisfied. So, that Vedanta Sutra, the thing is, there's a very interesting and very important point here, that Vyasadeva, initially, he wrote that Vedanta Sutra and considered it the final work. But then he did Srimad Bhagavatam. But people in other traditions, Vedic traditions, they're not really aware that Vyasadeva compiled Srimad Bhagavatam after Vedanta Sutra, not feeling satisfied with Vedanta Sutra. Many people from other traditions, sort of other branches of the Vedic traditions, impersonalists and, many impersonalists, they take it that Vedanta Sutra is the last, because after all, the name is Vedanta, Veda Anta, the end of the Vedas or the end of knowledge. So they focus on that, and they don't understand that Srimad Bhagavatam is, as Lord Chaitanya said, Srimad Bhagavatam is the natural commentary on Vedanta Sutra. It's very specifically done to expand the meanings of Vedanta Sutra and elaborate on Lord Krishna. So anyway, because people in those other traditions, because they see things like that, therefore, even in our own tradition, like in the Vaishnav Paramparas, the Vaishnav Sampradayas, there has been a tradition that in each Sampradaya, they must have a commentary on Vedanta Sutra. And Prabhupada mentions this here. It's actually the last paragraph of the introduction, that we Gaudiya Vaishnavas, we have Govinda Basya by Baladev Vijabhushan. Ramanujacharya has done a commentary. Madhvacharya has done a commentary. And the fact is that traditionally, because so many people from other Vedic traditions think that the Vedanta Sutra is the ultimate, therefore, Sampradayas, even our Vaishnav Sampradayas, are not accepted unless they have a commentary on Vedanta Sutra. And you may know that story of how Baladev Vijabhushan ended up doing the commentary, that in Jaipur, the king of Jaipur, who was like the royal protector of the Gaudiya Vaishnav tradition, Lord Chaitanya's tradition. Some Sri Vaishnav scholars approached him and told him that this Gaudiya tradition is not valid because it doesn't have a commentary on Vedanta Sutra. Actually, we accept that it does because Srimad Bhagavatam is the natural commentary, but they don't accept it as a commentary. They accept it as being the 18th Purana, the Bhagavat Purana. So Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur was the head of the Sampradaya. He was asked to come to Jaipur by the king and establish, do something, either write a commentary or explain why there's not, or do something about it. Otherwise, the king was about to let the Sri Vaishnavas take up the worship of Radha Govinda. Yeah. So Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur couldn't come, and he sent Baladev Vijayabhushan. And when Baladev Vijayabhushan arrived and understood the situation, he said, okay, no problem. Even though we feel it's not necessary because Bhagavatam is the natural commentary, I will do a commentary. So he went before Govinda, the deity, Radha Govinda in Jaipur, and prayed. And Radha Govinda, over the period, I think it was of a month. Was it a month? It was something like that. Radha Govinda dictated to him a commentary on Vedanta Sutra. And because Govinda dictated it, it is called Govinda Bhasya, as we read in this last paragraph here. Anyway, there's a bit of history for you, but it's nice and it's important. And it's such a good commentary that the Sri Vaishnavas, they were defeated and they gave up and said, okay, they're a bona fide sampradaya, let them worship Govinda. And then, so these things are touched on here in this last paragraph. And Prabhupada makes the point that it's not only Shankaracharya who's done a commentary on Vedanta Sutra, because many people in these other Vedic traditions, they don't really take the Vaishnav Sampradayas very seriously, and they don't take the Vaishnav Sampradayas commentaries on Vedanta Sutra seriously, but they take Shankaracharya seriously, and they take his commentary on Vedanta Sutra very seriously. Like, a funny little thing, it's interesting. I've been up to Badrinath twice and visited the temple there. And you know who the founder Acharya of the temple is? It's Shankaracharya. It's Shankaracharya. Oh my gosh. And it's a famous Vaishnav place of pilgrimage. So Shankaracharya is taken very seriously, but actually we have our Vaishnav commentaries on Vedanta Sutra. So then for the rest of the last paragraph, Prabhupada explains how Srimad Bhagavatam is really the commentary. It's really our commentary. Govinda Bhasya is very nice, but really our commentary on Vedanta Sutra is Srimad Bhagavatam. And Prabhupada, he just obviously can't really go into it at great length, but he gives an insight into it. That Srimad Bhagavatam, he says here in the middle of the paragraph, Srimad Bhagavatam begins with the first words of the Vedanta Sutra, Janmadyasya Yataha, which basically means Janma Adi. Janma Adi means the place, original birth, the original source, like that. That the Janmadyasya Yataha, Prabhupada goes on, that this Janmadyasya Yataha is fully explained in Srimad Bhagavatam, that this Janmadyasya Yataha simply, it means the absolute truth is that from whom everything emanates. That's what Janmadyasya Yataha translates as. The absolute truth is that from whom everything emanates. That's the first verse of Vedanta Sutra. But devotees, it is actually the first line of the first verse of Srimad Bhagavatam. And the Srimad Bhagavatam, just the first verse, explains that Janmadyasya Yataha in much more detail than, just Janmadyasya Yataha as it appears in Vedanta Sutra. And just as Srimad Bhagavatam the first verse of the Bhagavatam explains the first verse of Vedanta Sutra in more detail, so the rest of the Bhagavatam explains the rest of Vedanta Sutra in more detail. Does that make sense? Are you following? Or anyway, sorry if it's too complicated. So the first verse of the Bhagavatam, the first verse of Vedanta Sutra is Janmadyasya Yataha, that the absolute truth is that from which everything emanates. And then the rest of Vedanta Sutra is elaborating on that it's Brahman, So the first Srimad Bhagavatam is the commentary on Vedanta Sutra, and it begins by explaining in more detail. Srimad Bhagavatam begins by explaining in more detail this first verse of Vedanta Sutra. Let me read the first verse of Srimad Bhagavatam, and you'll see how it explains that Janmadyasya Yataha, the first verse of Vedanta Sutra, in much more detail. Janmadyasya yaton vayaditaratas charteshva vigyasvarat tene brahma hridaya adi kavaye muyanti yatsurayaha tejo vari mridam yata vinamayo yatratri sargom risha damna svema sadar nirasta kuakam satyam param dhimahi. That's the first verse of the Bhagavatam. And it is an explanation of the first verse of Vedanta Sutra, which is simply Janmadyasya Yataha, the source of everything. The absolute truth is the source of everything. So this is the translation from our Bhagavatam, from Prabhupada. O my Lord, Sri Krishna, son of Vasudeva, O all-pervading personality of Godhead, I offer my respectful obeisances unto you. I meditate upon Lord Sri Krishna because he is the absolute truth and the primeval cause of all causes, of the creation, sustenance, and destruction of the manifested universes. He is directly and indirectly conscious of all manifestations, and he is independent because there's no other cause beyond him. It is he only who first imparted the Vedic knowledge unto the heart of Brahmaji, the original living being. By him, even the great sages and demigods are placed into illusion, as one is bewildered by the illusory representations of water seen in fire or land seen on water. Only because of him do the material universes temporarily manifested by the reactions of the three modes of nature, appear factual, although they're unreal. I therefore meditate upon him, Lord Sri Krishna, who is eternally existent in the transcendental abode, which is forever free from the illusory representations of the material world. I meditate upon him, for he is the absolute truth. Yeah. So this gives an idea in principle. As this first verse of Srimad Bhagavatam elaborates on, explains more clearly and much more detail, the first verse of the Vedanta Sutra, so the whole Srimad Bhagavatam elaborates on the whole Vedanta Sutra. Yes, this is the point. So, Srila Prabhupada then, Prabhupada paraphrases, he concludes the introduction as follows. This is a summary, but it is explained in detail in Srimad Bhagavatam. If everything's emanating from the absolute truth, then what is the nature of the absolute truth? That is explained in Srimad Bhagavatam. The absolute truth must be consciousness. He is self-effulgent, Swarat. We develop our consciousness and knowledge by receiving knowledge from others, but for him it is said that he is self-effulgent. The whole summary of Vedic knowledge is Vedanta Sutra, and the Vedanta Sutra is explained by the writer himself in Srimad Bhagavatam. We finally request those who are actually after Vedic knowledge to try to understand the explanation of all Vedic knowledge from Srimad Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Hare Krishna devotees. See you tomorrow morning for japa.
Okay.